A hearty good afternoon to all. Welcome to our ninth session. It's been a while we have been meeting up. Thank you all for joining in. So we'll be having a session on gastrointestinal symptoms and it will be taken by Dr. Rajashree. So we can start with ma'am's presentation. We can have it for around 30 to 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of discussion. By 4, we can have our case presentation, followed by its discussion. Thank you all for joining in. Over to Dr. Sridevi.
Thank you, Raju. Nice to see everyone after a break of many weeks now. Hope everyone remember at least something that we have been discussing for many weeks. And it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Rajashree to this session. She is a very experienced palliative care physician, teacher to many of us, and she is currently working at Thrissur as well as in Amrita. And she is a course director in TIPS also with Pallium. Welcome you, ma'am, for the TIPS Eco session. And these are all the sister doctors under CHAI. They work in different places in India. Most of them are working in very rural and tribal areas. And that's about the people, the participants. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Sridevi, for the nice introduction, and thank you, TIPS team, for the opportunity to share my knowledge with all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are. I'm stopping your video, ma'am.
Okay, fine. That would be fine. Because of my unstable internet connection, I am just keeping my graceful face away from all of you. Anyway, so we can meet at the end of my presentation for the addition if possible, and the connection if it becomes stable. So I want this presentation to go without a hassle. So welcome all after the COVID break. Anyway, COVID will continue. Now having a lot of suffering, they need our like expertise and intervention. So it is the need of the hour that we have to restart the training program. We have like the palliative care necessarily means the an approach. It is an approach to improve the quality of life who are facing serious illness or serious health related suffering, and it concerns with their family members as well. It encompasses physical, psychosocial and spiritual well-being, and it should start through the dying phase.
Doctor, your voice is breaking in between, ma'am.
Oh, is it?
Ma'am, you're there near the router. You're sitting near the router.
Yeah, I am sitting near the computer.
Okay, ma'am, can you continue speaking now? We will check it once again.
Just let me know. Let me know, Raji. Okay.
Okay.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Okay. The thing is that okay, where were we? Like palliative care encompasses physical, psychosocial, and spiritual well-being. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay. And like probably we might have gone through the principles of symptom control, like EMA, evaluation, explanation, management, monitoring, and attention to detail. And then pain pathophysiology, the different types of pain like nociceptive and neuropathic pain, and the assessment of pain through, using different tools like numerical rating scale, descriptive scale, and faces pain scale, and the principles of WHO analgesic ladder, 3-step WHO analgesic ladder, by the ladder, by mouth, and like ensuring psychosocial support and attention to detail. The first part and bowel obstruction, which will be dealt next Friday. Am I clear, Raju?
Ma'am, your voice broke in between. I think we will continue and then we will see how it goes.
Madam, login ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത് ലാപ്ടോപ്പിൽ നിന്നാണോ ഫോണിലാണോ?
Laptop.
Madam, ഫോണിൽ നിന്ന് ലോഗിൻ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുമോ? Zoom.
Let me give a try. I'm just taking a break. Okay.
Okay.
Connection.
Raju, I think ma'am has logged again. I can see Dr. Raju.
Hello.
Hello.
Ma'am, you have logged in from your mobile?
No, I have logged from my computer only. Is my voice clear now?
No, ma'am, it's breaking only.
Because
Hello.
I have connected hotspot.
No, ma'am, we can't hear you.
No, ma'am, it's not at all clear, whatever you say.
Sorry everyone for the interruption. Ma'am has some connectivity issues there. We kind of figured out that. Let's see whether it works better in the phone.
Video is clear, only audio is not clear, ma'am.
Yeah, she has some connectivity issues there. So we changed the connection. Vishnu helped her to change the connection to Jio, I guess. Actually, Jio works very well for all of us. No interruption at all. But
Devi, I can hear you. Am I audible?
But ma'am, your voice is breaking. Like before completing one whole sentence, it's breaking multiple times. Vishnu, you want to call her and ask to log in from mobile and go. Do you think it works better with mobile than the laptop?
Madam, നമ്മളെ കോളിംഗ് ഓപ്ഷൻ ഇപ്പം സൂം ഡിസേബിൾ ചെയ്തു. ഫോൺ വഴി വിളിക്കാൻ പറ്റൂല.
അല്ല, ഫോണിൽ ലോഗിൻ ചെയ്ത വ്യത്യാസം ഉണ്ടാവും.
വ്യത്യാസം ഉണ്ടോ മാം? ഇത്രയും ബാൻഡ്വിഡ്ത്ത് എടുക്കൂല ഫോൺ.
I think we should call and tell her to log in from phone. ഫോണിൽ ചിലപ്പോൾ സൂം ഉണ്ടാവില്ലായിരിക്കും.
Hello, yes, it is there.
there logged in or?
ഞാനപ്പോ പോയി തിരിച്ചു join ചെയ്തു. ഒരു minute.
Sorry everyone for the major gap. We were Vishnu was trying to fix it for some time now. I think he made a trial call and everything seemed to be fine. But I think when he spoken for more than 2 minutes, then again it started breaking. Anyone of you, meanwhile, till Madam logging in, anyone of you dealing with COVID patients at the moment? I have seen some photographs of one of the doctor wearing the PPE and all. I don't remember who it was, but any of you have?
Dr. Rajri, can you hear us?
Yes.
Ma'am, logging is it in Raju? She there?
I think she just came in and she went now. Dr. Rajasri, can you hear us, ma'am?
I can hear you very well. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay.
So, ma'am, I'm sharing the presentation now. I'm sharing the presentation now.
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, you can continue, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry for the technology hassle. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you are.
Okay. So, as we have seen, the first part of gastrointestinal symptom, it will be understanding nausea and vomiting. So, nausea, by definition, it is the unpleasant sensation with an imminent need to vomit. Please understand, it is a sensory feeling and it is really unpleasant with an imminent need to vomit. This sensation may or may not culminate in vomiting. Okay, that we need to understand. So it is an unpleasant sensory feeling with an imminent need to vomit. Vomiting is an activity with strong contraction of upper abdominal and lower intercostal muscles with the expulsion of gastric contents. Okay, so why is it important that we need to treat nausea and vomiting? Because it affects patients' daily functioning. It hinders with quality of life of the patient. It poses non-compliance to treatment, particularly cancer chemotherapy, because we know cancer treatment associated, like chemotherapy associated nausea and vomiting, it's a nightmare for many of the patients. So with mere incidence of nausea and vomiting, many patients will not adhere to cancer treatment. So it may cause non-compliance to cancer treatment. So and again, it produces inadequate symptom control. Because of fear or anxiety of vomiting, patients may not take medicines. Because of vomiting, there would be poor absorption of the medicines already ingested. And vomiting as well as nausea escalates distress for both patient and family members. Is it clear? Next slide, please. So what are the objectives we should focus when we plan management? We may not be in a position to put a full stop for nausea and vomiting, but at least we should aim at to stop or reduce the frequency of vomiting. If at all we are not able to stop vomiting as a whole, we should be able to reduce the frequency. And thereby reducing the frequency, we have to establish compliance to the treatment. in order to administer oral medicines. And we can give parenteral medicines while the patients are in the hospital. When they are discharged, they have to take medicines by mouth. So only when they are comfortable with their GI tract, then only they will be able to take medicines. So stopping or reducing frequency of nausea, vomiting, that facilitates compliance of treatment. So compliance to treatment so as to take medicines orally, thereby improving quality of life. Next slide, please. So this is the brief pathophysiology of nausea, vomiting. Okay, I know the slide is quite complicated, but I will try to explain it as possible. So this is very important. This pathophysiology is very important for us to understand this mechanism. That is, all nausea and vomiting cannot be treated by a single medicine, because the vomiting reflex as such is it originates from the vomiting center, otherwise known as emetic pattern generator. Emetic pattern generator itself has got multiple receptors which will also it is just like the station master
Doctor, your voice is breaking.
and the station master. Am I clear?
Yes, you are now. Ma'am, can you repeat it once again? What you sent?
The vomiting center is just like the station master flagging the green flag so as to facilitate the exit and entry of various trains in a railway station. Am I clear?
Yes, you are.
And he does it, the station master does it according to the signals or the inputs he receives from other stations. Just like that, the vomiting center also, it generates vomiting, the act of vomiting depending on the input which it receives from other centers like gastrointestinal tract and heart. That is from mechanical so these receive signals to vomiting center. And what am I audible?
In between it was broken, ma'am. In between we lost it for some time.
Are all others muted? Because I can hear some sounds from. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. Certain drugs we ingest will produce inflammation or irritation to the gastrointestinal tract. And these irritations will be carried to the vomiting center through 9th or 10th cranial nerve, whereby it results in the generation of the vomiting reflex. And certain drugs will not cause irritation to the gastrointestinal mucosa, but after absorption, they will pass through the bloodstream and reach chemoreceptor trigger zone, which is located in the floor of fourth ventricle, that is called area postrema. There we have certain receptors which are so sensitive to chemical composition in the blood. So the important receptors are dopamine and serotonin. Just let me know whether am I audible or clear.
You're clear now, ma'am.
Okay. So this is the second zone, the chemoreceptor trigger zone. The first one was the impulses or the, not impulses, input from the gastrointestinal tract. And the second is chemoreceptor trigger zone, which is located in the floor of fourth ventricle. There we have dopamine as well as serotonin receptors. Other one is vestibular system, where the receptors are principally histamine and muscarinic receptors of cholinergic system. Okay, these are principal mediators for the vomiting associated with movement or motion. Okay, the fourth zone is central nervous system as a whole, meningeal irritation, cortex, where the senses like sight, some pungent or offensive smell, anxiety, fear, or memory. So these are cortically mediated inputs. So we have seen 4 zones like gastrointestinal tract and heart principally through by irritation of diaphragm, where the impulses are carried through cholinergic transmission and a little bit serotoninergic system as well. And second zone is chemoreceptor trigger zone, where the principal mediators are serotonin receptors and dopamine receptors. Vestibular system, where the receptors are histamine as well as muscarinic component of cholinergic system. Cortical and meningeal receptors. There are multiple mechanisms postulated. One of the gamma-aminobutyric acid. There are 4 zones contributing or pouring inputs to vomiting center, which is the final step just before the vomiting reflex starts. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. So let us look at what are the principles of management. Correct the cause, correct the correctables. We have to treat what is the cause for that particular mechanism for vomiting. And we need to focus also on non-pharmacological measures and whatever dietary modifications possible for our patient population. And the most important is pharmacological measures, that is blocking the receptors at various sites using the appropriate antiemetics. Clear? Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, next slide, please. So non-pharmacological measures avoid situations which induce nausea and vomiting. That is particularly certain types, certain food, types of food that will, that might be causing some kind of irritation or nauseating feeling to the patient. So that like garlic, cabbage or cauliflower. So these type of foodstuffs which might produce offensive smell or odor or taste can be stopped. Calm and reassuring environment, a room which is well ventilated and well lit, and there should be provision for fresh air to come and leave the room, and nurse the patient in the upright position. This is very important. So most of our patients will be sick and they will be nursed in the recumbent position. Recumbent position is always a threat for the patient to have reflux esophagitis or vomiting. And this is very important when a patient is fed through nasogastric tube, because nasogastric tube passes through lower esophageal sphincter, thereby compromising its tight closure. So when the patient is fed full in a recumbent position with a nasogastric tube in place, this is very chance for the patient to regurgitate. And if the patient is in semi-conscious state, so he or she can aspirate and then result in aspiration pneumonia. So nursing, at least while, particularly when the patient is fed, and also 20 minutes after every feed, is ideal to reduce the frequency of vomiting, so that we can give a semi-Fowler position when the patient is fed. Next slide, please. Non-pharmacological measures continued. Good oral hygiene. We know that whenever many people, they vomit, after vomiting, they will wash their mouth and oral cavity. That is to clean or cleanse their mouth. So good oral hygiene is always a prerequisite as a non-pharmacological measures to control nausea, vomiting. Control malodor from colostomy, fungating tumor, decubitus ulcer. The malodor should be continued. For that, the colostomy should be emptied, and if possible, patients should be trained for colostomy irrigation so that bowel movements can be regularized. Fungating tumor, the foul odor from the fungating tumor can be appropriately managed by topical application of metronidazole. Infection in the decubitus ulcer also should be managed by using, if necessary, using daily cleaning, and if necessary by using antibiotics and suitable distractors. And if you keep on thinking of nausea and vomiting, any person will vomit. You need not become a patient. So any person will vomit if he or she keeps on thinking about vomiting. So suitable distractors. We don't have to go near the patient, ask every minute or every hour, do you feel like do you feel like vomiting? Do you have nausea? Like when we are so much enthusiastic about caring a patient, we keep on asking. Just don't do that. Don't do that, because when each time when we ask about nausea and vomiting, patient also will keep thinking about it. So he will get more chance to develop nausea and vomiting. Next slide, please. Coming to dietary modification, frequent small meals. Instead of having a heavy full meal, give frequent small meals which will just occupy half of the stomach. Avoid fatty, sweet and spicy food, and particularly carbonated drinks. This will facilitate, lowering the lower esophageal sphincter tone and thereby facilitating vomiting. And bland food and clear fluids are tolerated better. Next slide, please. So coming to pharmacological management. Pharmacological management, I thought of giving you a case scenario for each situation and then highlighting why are we choosing this particular antiemetic in this particular condition. Next slide, please. So this is case number 1. Mr. X with glioma of left parietal lobe, recently diagnosed, no definite treatment has been taken, complaining of intense headache and vomiting. So we have a patient with glioma of left parietal lobe, recently diagnosed, no definite treatment, and he is complaining of intense headache and vomiting. This is not a purely palliative care scenario. Many of us might have come across with similar situation, isn't it? So remember about the 4 zones which we had already discussed in the pathophysiology or the mechanism of vomiting. The first one was gastrointestinal tract, chemoreceptor trigger zone, vestibular mechanism, and then cortical and meningeal mechanism. So let us think which might have contributed to vomiting in this particular patient. Next slide, please. It is due to raised intracranial tension or raised intracranial pressure from a space-occupying lesion. It is characterized by morning headache, and if the patient is having so much of increase in the intracranial pressure, there will be changes in the consciousness or behavior pattern, or there could be coexisting neurological symptoms depending upon the size of the space-occupying lesion and the degree of rise in intracranial tension. This particular patient or in the case history, there is no mention about the change in consciousness or behavior, or nothing is mentioned about the neurological symptoms as well. So it is given that only headache and vomiting. So most probably, most probably it is from raised intracranial pressure. So let us see what is the mechanism and what are the treatments for nausea, vomiting from this mechanism. Next slide, please. So it is from raised intracranial pressure, as already mentioned. It is from meningeal. There are other mechanisms for cortical stimulation as well, like sensory input. We have already mentioned like sight, smell, fear, anxiety, etc. But here it is from raised intracranial pressure and probably from meningeal irritation as well. Next slide. The drugs are dexamethasone, 16 to 24 milligram once daily, administered preferably before 2 p.m. Why? Because late administration of dexamethasone will produce a surge in vivo cortisol level, thereby disturbing our normal sleep pattern. Dexamethasone is a long-acting mineralocorticoid. It will produce fairly good action for 24 to 36 hours. So we need to administer only once daily. Okay, the dosage start from low 60, maximum 24 milligram as a single dose. Along with that, we have to give paracetamol as well. When we treat a symptom, we have to treat the concomitant symptoms as well. Here the patient had intense headache. Don't leave that aside. Treat pain also along with nausea, vomiting. So when we give dexamethasone, we should give paracetamol also 500 to 1000 milligram QID. Paracetamol is safe up to 4 gram a day. And we shouldn't stop dexamethasone and paracetamol because this is not the definitive treatment. These are only symptomatic measures. Patients should be referred to an oncologist for appropriate oncological treatment possible. It could be surgery or radiotherapy. Let that be decided by the oncologist. It can be curative as well as palliative. Whatever be, let that be decided by the oncologist, but it should be done wherever it is possible. That is what correct the correctable. This is space occupying lesion is the correctable factor that should be corrected if appropriate and appropriate for the general condition of the patient, and if it is possible and feasible in the nearest medical institution. Next slide, please. Next slide. So now we have second scenario. Hope I am clear. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. So we have two situations here. One, Mrs. S having carcinoma of body of stomach where no curative option is feasible, reports with epigastric pain and vomiting. Here we have a woman with body of stomach, carcinoma, body of stomach, no curative option. She reports with epigastric pain and vomiting. At the same time, we have another patient on another bed, Mrs. B, who has been started on tablet diclofenac 75 milligram TID for knee joint pain, and she experiences epigastric discomfort and vomiting after 3 doses of the drug. So these two patients were lying next to one person, another person, and both were experiencing epigastric pain and vomiting. Please understand that the mechanisms are totally different in these two patients, though the symptom presentation are same. Both have epigastric pain and vomiting, but the symptom presentations are thus similar, but the mechanisms are different. Next slide, please. Gastric stasis or outlet obstruction. That is the case with Mrs. S, who is having carcinoma of body stomach with epigastric pain and vomiting. Feels okay for the most of the time. Nausea depending on the severity of obstruction. And because of the collective material, patient feels better after vomiting. Because it is a gastric outlet obstruction, there won't be any bile in the vomitus. And usually the patient vomits. The history will be like that. It's not immediately after the meal. It takes about half an hour to 1 hour after the meal for the patient to vomit. Epigastric discomfort or pain. We have seen that Mrs. S also had epigastric pain. So if the patient is not taking any food, he or she might feel okay. Okay. And the intensity or the severity of nausea and vomiting depends on the extent of or the severity of obstruction. And the patient might feel nauseated about half an hour or 1 hour later each meal, and patient feels better after vomiting, and there won't be any bile because it is gastric outlet obstruction. Next slide. Mechanism, obstruction. In the first case, obstruction, stasis, distension, mechanoreceptors, vomiting. From the gastrointestinal tract, the impulses are, inputs are sent to vomiting center. In the second case, Mrs. B, who had taken tablet diclofenac 75 milligram TID, that itself is a higher dose for knee joint pain. This particular lady might have developed gastric irritation from a potentially from a potential source like tablet diclofenac. Diclofenac can produce, being an NSAID, it can produce gastric irritation and it can produce inflammation. Okay, so both impulses or the inputs are sent through vagal receptors. Next slide, please. So let us look at what are the treatment strategies. See, for obstruction and stasis, we have seen that there is carcinoma of body of stomach, there is a space occupying lesion, so there is an obstruction. So there also, to relieve the peritumor edema, so as to bring the size, the peritumor edema and the size of the lesion little lower, little less, lesser, we have to use a steroid. Again, our choice is dexamethasone, but at a lesser dose, 8 to 12 milligram once daily. To promote prokinesis, we have to use metoclopramide, 10 milligram thrice or 4 times a day. Metoclopramide is a 5-HT4 agonist. We have to edema, so the space, intraluminal space will be more. Then we have to promote prokinesis by giving metoclopramide. And we can use domperidone as well, but domperidone cannot be given orally. In nausea and vomiting, this is one thing which we have to remember. Till the control of nausea and vomiting, we have to preferably give pharmacological measures through a parenteral route for better absorption. It can be given subcutaneously. If the intravenous line is not available, we can give subcutaneously as well. But oral drugs, orally administered drugs, may not be absorbed properly. That is the problem with domperidone. Domperidone, we have only oral preparation. But for second patient, Mrs. B, who had developed gastric irritation, dexamethasone is not the choice. Dexamethasone itself is another gastric irritant. So we don't have to use dexamethasone at all. We have to stop the offending drug, give omeprazole, which is a proton pump inhibitor, 20 milligram BD. And again, we have to promote metoclopramide. Sucralfate used, but simultaneous administration of sucralfate and omeprazole doesn't prove much of benefit, because sucralfate to act, it needs an acidic medium. When you give omeprazole, that will be neutralized. So sucralfate will not have much of action there. So for its action, it needs acidic medium. So if you are giving omeprazole, sucralfate will not do much of, cannot exert much of its action. So we can give omeprazole, metoclopramide, and the most important thing is we have to stop the offending treatment. Here it is diclofenac. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Scenario number Mr. P, who has started 4 hours, 3 days ago for soft tissue sarcoma metastasis, reports to have recent onset of nausea and vomiting. This is something which we are likely to do, because we know that morphine is the most potent and most dependable strong opioids, which we can give confidently by multiple routes. So here this patient had severe pain, for which we have started him on tablet morphine, 10 milligram for hourly. After 3 days, he developed nausea, vomiting. I mean, he might have been nauseated all the days, but after 3 days, he reported that I don't want this medication. I don't let my pain be with me, because my nausea and vomiting are so troublesome that I can't eat anything. So what could be the reason? Next slide, please. Mechanisms. Here the mechanism is triggered. Multiple drugs or many drugs can stimulate chemoreceptor trigger zone so as to result in vomiting, like chemotherapy agents, NSAIDs, opioids. Here opioid was a culprit. Digoxin, antiarrhythmic like mexiletine and flecainide, theophylline, anticonvulsants, and chemoreceptor trigger zone will be stimulated from the metabolic dysfunction as well, like hypokalemia, hyperkalemia, hyponatremia, hypoglycemia, uremia, hyperuricemia. So all metabolic functions, and many drugs will produce stimulation of chemoreceptor trigger zone to result in nausea, vomiting. The receptors are dopamine, 5-hydroxytryptamine, the third subunit 5-HT3, and neurokinin as well. Dopamine and serotonin, I mean 5-hydroxytryptamine, are the principal receptors or the mediators. Next slide, please. So we have to treat the patient with haloperidol. Haloperidol we can give at a small dose. It is a typical antipsychotic and a potent dopamine receptor antagonist. So when we think of haloperidol, the first thing which will come to, oh, it's a drug which is given by the psychiatrist for the mentally ill patient. Yes, it is true, but it can be used for managing nausea, vomiting induced by opioids as well. Though I have shown that 1.5 milligram to 2.5 milligram OD or BD, it may be effective as small as a dose level 0.5 milligram as well. For older patients, we can even start the patient on 0.5 milligram. At this dosage, haloperidol, it is quite unlikely to cause extrapyramidal side effect. That is one thing which prevents many physicians or many general practitioners using haloperidol for many situations where it can be very much effective. So at doses like 0.5 or 1 milligram, haloperidol is unlikely to produce extrapyramidal side effects, which is manifested as involuntary movements and restlessness. It is quite unlikely. And we can use metoclopramide as well. Metoclopramide also is a weak dopamine antagonist, and it produces gastric motility enhancement as well. We can, and if you are not comfortable with haloperidol, we can use metoclopramide as well. 10 milligram TID should be given. For opioid-induced nausea vomiting, antiemetic should be given minimum 3 weeks along with commencement of opioid therapy as well. Okay, but 3 days. I'm sorry, it is not for 3 weeks, 3 days. So after 3 days, if the patient doesn't vomit or so whenever you start any opioid therapy, commence antiemetic therapy as well and continue it for 3 days, and stop if the patient is not developing nausea and vomiting and make it SOS. And if the vomiting and nausea is intractable, if it is too troublesome, then we may have to think of other opioid. I mean, if morphine cannot be tolerated because of the side effect, we may have to think of other opioids for pain relief. Remember, our options are much less. We have fentanyl, which is not available in the oral form. We have only patches. And we have methadone, but methadone is too complex for a beginner to use. Next slide, please. For Mr. R is a patient with chronic kidney disease on hemodialysis twice a week and is experiencing continuous nausea, vomiting. He is slightly disoriented as well. He is a CKD patient and he is on regular hemodialysis twice a week and he is having continuous nausea, vomiting, and we can think of, and he is disoriented as well. So we can clearly know that we can come to a conclusion that it could be from metabolic dysfunction. Next slide, please, which might have stimulated a chemoreceptor trigger zone. So the nausea, vomiting associated with metabolic disturbances are characterized by gradual onset, constant nausea, uneasy fatigability, and confusion and drowsiness. Here the patient had almost constant nausea. He was disoriented as well. Next slide. Mechanism again, stimulation of chemoreceptor trigger zone. Metabolic causes, uremia. Here in this patient, uremia was a cause. Hypercalcemia, hyponatremia, hepatic failure, ketoacidosis. There are many other metabolic causes also stimulate chemoreceptor trigger zone to result in nausea, vomiting. Next slide, please. Here again, the first line of drug is haloperidol. In metabolic dysfunction induced nausea, vomiting, it may require more than one antiemetic for the appropriate control. So sometimes we have to combine two dopamine antagonists like haloperidol and metoclopramide. Not always, but in some situation we have to combine both. Next slide, please. The fifth situation, Miss B is on chemotherapy for carcinoma breast. She experiences severe nausea and vomiting during and after chemotherapy. Okay, so during and after chemotherapy. And in the second situation, she is due for her third cycle after 2 days. She is nauseated and unable to eat. Please note the difference between the two situations. Mrs. B, she is experiencing nausea, vomiting during and after chemotherapy. In the second situation, she had received chemotherapy, but that is some time back, and she is due to receive the third cycle after, but that is only after 2 days, but still she feels nauseated. Next slide, please. Let us see what is the mechanism. The two situations, the mechanisms are different. When a patient experiences nausea, vomiting while or immediately after chemotherapy, okay, it is because of the chemotherapeutic agents causing nausea vomiting. It is through chemoreceptor trigger zone stimulation. It is not through dopamine. Remember, though the zone which gets stimulated is chemoreceptor trigger zone, but the mediator or the receptor is not dopamine. It is 5-hydroxytryptamine, particularly the third subunit 5-HT3 and neurokinin. It is not dopamine at all. 5-hydroxytryptamine and neurokinin. And in the second situation, where she is nauseated just 2 days before the next cycle, that is because of the anxiety and the memory associated with previous emetogenic chemotherapy. She knows that her previous chemotherapy was highly emetogenic. She had a lot of distress and discomfort out of that. So just 2 days prior to the next cycle, she becomes increasingly anxious so as to feel continuously nauseated. The mechanisms are different. In the second situation, it is a cortical stimulation. Whereas in the first step, it is a chemoreceptor trigger zone stimulation. Next slide, please. For chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting, we can give dexamethasone 8 milligram, usually once daily. And while the patient is on chemotherapy, they never used to come to palliative care physician. That will be well managed by medical oncologist. But if the patient reports chemotherapy with vomiting, we can give dexamethasone 8 milligram OD, or ondansetron 8 milligram TID, or granisetron 1 milligram BD. It is usually given for 3 days after chemotherapy. And please understand, nowadays, many medical oncologists give which is a very useful anti-emetic, which is a neurokinin antagonist, along with chemotherapy, which is a very good sealing mechanism for chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting. It is given continuously for 3 days. Day 1, 125 milligram, and the day 2 and day 3, 80 milligram each. It comes as a package continuously for 3 days. So, emesis associated with chemotherapy is much less nowadays. For the second situation, anxiety-induced nausea vomiting, lorazepam is the best drug, because we have to control anxiety, for which we can give low doses of lorazepam, like 0.5 milligram. And along with, she needs counseling and debriefing. It's not only pharmacological measures. We have to go for counseling and debriefing cycles. It may take several cycles for her to understand the situation and cope. Next slide, please. Mrs. C is on treatment for carcinoma of ovary. She complains of progressive distension of abdomen, moderate abdominal pain, constipation, nausea, and vomiting for 2 days. Carcinoma ovary, progressive distension of abdomen, moderate abdominal pain, constipation, nausea, vomiting. Abdominal pain, constipation, nausea, vomiting. These are triads of intestinal obstruction or malignant bowel obstruction. Next slide, please. Uncomfortable abdominal distension, colic may or may not be present. Constipation will be a predominant symptom depending on the site of obstruction. In the higher levels of obstruction, we will discuss in detail in the next part. If the level of obstruction is higher up, constipation may not be a presenting symptom. But if the obstruction is lower down, like colon, constipation can be a presenting symptom, and the vomiting may come as a late symptom. Next slide, please. So the mechanism here is obstruction, but there could be serotonin release from the mucosal enterochromaffin cells. Release of serotonin. This is another situation where ondansetron, or the popular Emicit, can be useful as an anti-emetic apart from chemotherapy. Okay, intestinal obstruction. Next slide, please. Management again, we will discuss it next Friday. peritoneal edema, ondansetron 4 to 8 mg.
Madam, we lost your voice completely.
Ma'am have logged off, ma'am. Mostly she'll be.
No.
Dr. Rajasri, can you hear us,
Unmute,
ma'am?
unmute.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. Ondansetron, is it clear?
Yes, yes, it is.
Ondansetron 4 to 8 milligram or 2.5 to 5 milligram, which is metoclopramide may be used if there is no colic. In colicky intestinal obstruction, metoclopramide should not be used because metoclopramide will promote colic. And if the colic is intractable, we have to use.
Ma'am, we lost you again. Raju, is she still there or?
Yes, I am there.
We couldn't hear you, ma'am. We just heard till metoclopramide.
Am I audible?
No, ma'am.
Ma'am, your voice is breaking in between.
Is it clear now?
Yes, ma'am, it is. You can continue.
Metoclopramide cannot be used if there is colic, and in that case, hyoscine butyl bromide 20 to 40 milligram may be a better option to control colic. But when you are giving hyoscine butyl bromide, metoclopramide should not be given, and emesis should be controlled either with ondansetron or haloperidol, because hyoscine is an antispastic that will slow down peristaltic activity, and metoclopramide is exactly opposing because it promotes. So if you are using bromide or buscopan for intractable colic, so either ondansetron or haloperidol should be used to control vomiting. And in order to reduce the content of the distended bowel, we can use octreotide, which is a somatostatin analog, which will reduce intestinal secretion. We can use it 600 microgram over 24 hours, which can be administered subcutaneously. Anyway, we will be discussing in the next class. Next slide, please. This is the last. Mr. H is a patient with advanced carcinoma of alveolus. There is a fungating mass on the right side of mandible with foul smell and orocutaneous fistula. He has been experiencing frequent nausea and vomiting. There is a fungating mass with foul smell and orocutaneous fistula. So we have seen that cortical stimulation comes smell as well. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sensory input, smell. Next slide. So here the management strategy is control the infection. So using a topical as well as systemic metoclopramide, and along with that we may give metoclopramide 10 milligram TDS for a couple of days so as to control vomiting. But the primary focus should be directed to controlling infection from the fungating tumor. Next slide, please. Okay, we have one more.
Ma'am, we can't hear you.
Doctor?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you now.
Okay. Experiences severe nausea and vomiting while traveling. So it's very clear that is associated with movement sickness. So next slide, please. it's the mediators are histamine and muscarinic. Next slide.
Doctor, your voice is breaking badly.
Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
Am I clear now?
Yes, yes, you are.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. We can use antihistamines like promethazine, that is Phenergan, 12.5 to 25 milligram BD, Cinnarizine, that is Tugeron, 25 milligram TAD, beta-histine, that is Vertin, 4 to 8 milligram TAD. So remember here the mediators are histamine and muscarinic. Muscarinic division of cholinergic system. Next slide. There are two drugs. Next slide. Aprepitant, this is the one which I have already mentioned. NK1 antagonist inhibit action of substance P in the emetic pathways. It binds to neurokinin receptors in the abdominal vagus, nucleus stratus solitarius, and area postrema. It decreases emesis after cisplatin, morphine, and radiation therapy, and also in AIDS. This is one new antagonist, but it is not that new for the medical oncologists because they are regularly using it for chemotherapy induced nausea vomiting. Next slide. Next slide. Cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are opioid derivatives. Endogenous cannabinoids.
Dr. Rajasri? Dr. Rajasri?
Yes, I am. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am, you are now.
Can I? Cannabinoids works through agonism of cannabinoid receptors. They indirectly act through the pathway to inhibit other CNS neurotransmitters, and there could be a possible effect in enterochromaffin cells in the GI tract. They are in the experimental stage. We haven't seen. Next slide, please. Next slide. So there are a couple of notes which we have to remember. Prokinetic drugs antagonize antispasmodic, so they should not be combined. And if there is complete bowel obstruction, prokinetics should not be used. Octreotide, ondansetron, and granisetron are associated with constipation. And if cause is not clear, try one of the first-line antiemetic, either metoclopramide or haloperidol. In many situations, combination of antiemetics may be required. Next slide. Next slide. Take home message, identify the likely cause, identify the neurotransmitter, choose most potent antagonist, choose appropriate route either intravenous or subcutaneous, give antiemetic regularly, review frequently and titrate dose. If symptoms persist, review more causes and may need additional or alternative drugs. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Ma'am, thank you so much. And sorry for bothering you with the net problem. In between, we lose your voice, and I don't know why it is happening again and again. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. We can take a few questions before we move on to the presentation, because in between, although the everything was on the slides, you might have lost. I'll just connect my headphones so that my voice will be. Thank you so for the presentation, ma'am. It was broken in between, but everything was written on the slide. So before moving on to today's presentation, we can take up a few questions because we might have missed a few things in between.
Okay, please. Please.
Anyone from the participants who want to make ask any questions? Raju, is there anyone waiting here?
You can either raise your hands or unmute yourself and speak.
There is a question in the chat session. Is there any treatment for any treatment for vomiting due to lack of space? dysgeusia, bitter taste in mouth. Is there any treatment for that?
Any treatment for
Lack of taste, bitter taste in the mouth.
loss of taste? So taste in the mouth is usually either associated with pathology in the oral cavity. First of all, we have to look at the oral cavity and see.
Ma'am, we lost you again.
Dr. Rajasri, can you repeat it once again, ma'am? We have lost you in between.
Taste in the mouth can be from any oral pathology or can be from any nutritional deficiency. Oral pathology be ruled out by any lesion, any part of the oral cavity, like atrophied tongue, some bronchitis, or candida, and if there is some nutritional deficiency, you can complement it with appropriate, like supplements, vitamin supplements. And if it is too troublesome, my first choice will be a prokinetic like metoclopramide or domperidone. 10 milligram TDS.
The answer, I'll just repeat what I heard. It was breaking in between. So first thing is to look for any nutrition deficiency, and second thing would be to look for any local pathology, like a thrush or any um, atrophic issues on the tongue or any other local oral pathology. And if not, candidiasis is one of the commonest cause for this bitter taste or lack of taste or vomiting, inability to eat everything. So look for that local pathology, look for nutritional deficiency. If not, she might recommend metoclopramide or domperidone. Am I clear?
Yes, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Hello.
Yes, doctor. Any more questions regarding the session? Dr. Anand? Ma'am, can you unmute from your end? Yes, doctor.
Yes. Now, I wanted to ask about Stemetil. Stemetil injections is a very good antiemetic. Can it be used in any of those situations that you have just told us about?
Ma'am, are you there?
Yes. Yes. Am I audible?
No.
Hello.
Am I audible?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear
Hello.
you.
Stemetil or prochlorperazine is a good antiemetic, but nowadays it is less preferred, madam. That's the reason why I didn't mention it. More people.
Okay.
I mean, I know that it's a good antiemetic, and it had been used by many physicians or many general practitioners in the earlier days. But nowadays, its place has been taken over by cinnarizine and beta-histine. And in pediatric group, they prefer to give promethazine.
Then, ma'am, is Perinom also, is Perinom the same as metoclopramide? Perinom?
Perinom is metoclopramide. Perinom is metoclopramide.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Any last question for ma'am before we move on to just one more question we can take, if there is any pressing question. there is nothing we can. So ma'am has gone in detail about the basic principles of symptom management and very specifically about started with non-pharmacological management of nausea and vomiting, which is really important because many a times these small changes in their diet or many things, as she mentioned, can change dramatically many issues faced by them. And then she mentioned about the 5 key players which we should remember whenever you are seeing nausea and vomiting. It is not the same drug for every nausea and vomiting. We have to track back the cause, which are the receptors involved, and which receptors are to be blocked. Accordingly, we have to choose which drug to be used. So she mentioned various case scenarios through which we have seen how intracranial pressure, anxiety related, how the chemoreceptor trigger zones are involved, how the prokinetic helping relieving nausea, vomiting, how we should not, why we should not combine prokinetic and the anticholinergic drugs. So she mentioned in detail about that. We know that the voice was breaking a little bit in between, but everything was written on the slide. Please go through the slide as soon as you get them and get back to us if you have any queries. We'll help you with that. Can we move on to case presentation, Raju, if there is no other question?
Yes, ma'am, we can. So we have Dr. Elizabeth Joseph taking the presentation today from Shuddham Hospital, Maharashtra. Over to you, doctor.
Yes, good evening, ma'am. Good evening.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. You can continue.
Yeah. Yes. You're giving the slides, so I have to take it. Okay. I am presenting the case. A 26-year-old male patient who presented to our hospital with the diagnosis acute intestinal obstruction. He presented complaints where fever on and off since last 45 days, nausea and vomiting since last 45 days, pain abdomen, colicky type, weight loss, fatigue, and palpitation. Next slide, please, ma'am. History of the illness. This 26-year-old male patient presented in a very desperate state with complaints of fever since 45 days. Fever since last 45 days with the persistent nausea and vomiting and abdominal pain. He was not able to take anything orally because of his nausea and vomiting, even though he was feeling hungry. There is marked weight loss and fatigue due to his state of starvation and was not able even to walk without support. He had received treatment from different clinics but had no relief for his suffering. The patient and the family members had the superstition that the sickness is the result of something done to them by some enemies, and they spent a lot of time with the traditional treatments like puja, mantra, etc., without taking ideal treatment. His USD abdomen, taken 35 days back, showed long segment of thickened and hypoechoic distal jejunal ileal loop with a very ideal inflamed mesentery and dilated proximal bowel lobes. On examination, physical examination, he was conscious, well oriented, but looking emaciated. His weight was 39 kg. He had BP 100 by 80 millimeters mercury, temperature 100 degree Fahrenheit, and pulse rate 112 per minute. Per abdomen was soft with a generalized tenderness, and on auscultation, the bowel sounds was exaggerated. X-ray erect abdomen was done, and it showed multiple air fluid levels. And Other investigations done were blood, CBC, HIV, Vidal, LFT, and KFT. Hereby, CBC was showing HB 10 gram percent, total WBC count 18,900 per millimeter cube, poly 51%, lymphocytes 21%, and eosinophil 28%. ESR was 10 millimeter per hour. Vidal test, KFT and LFT were not significant. USD abdomen was the significant report for me. Then the patient was on X-ray abdomen, the erect abdomen, multiple air fluid level was seen, and came to the diagnosis of intestinal obstruction and the treatment. Patient is immediately admitted and started nasogastric drainage and put on or IV fluids and other antibiotics. By nasogastric drainage, about 120 ml of thick dark greenish fluid was drained, and that tube was kept in situ. And then the stomach wash also given with normal saline. Continuous nausea and vomiting stopped, and the patient started feeling comfortable with that. Then the patient was allowed to take only sips of water to moisten the mouth, and was continued on IV fluids for the first 24 hours, and then semi-solid food afterwards. Symptomatic and some supportive treatment started, and with the medications, following medications: injection pantoprazole 40 mg IV BD, injection ondansetron 4 mg IV BD, injection ciproflox 100 ml IV BD, metronidazole, ceftriaxone, sulbactam also given. Then other symptomatic drugs, and the injection diclofenac was given stat dose because of he was complaining fever, body pain, etc. Betnesol 1 ampere already given on the basis of the inflammatory state of the intestinal loops. Paracetamol 500 mg up for the fever, multivitamin syrup, and injection diazepam 1 dose was given because he was very restless. And the patient was stayed in the hospital for 8 days, responded well to the medications, and repeat USG abdomen was done on the day before discharge, and it showed evidence of gastritis early. The psychosocial aspects. The patient belongs to a middle class family. The family is doing some business and are well known in the society, and now this patient is becoming a burden for them, and they are considering this disease condition as some bad sign for the family. His father and 2 elder brothers were staying with him all through the days of hospital stay, and were happy to see the gradual improvement of his health. He started taking orally semi-solid food from the 3rd day of admission. I tried to convince the relatives, the father and the brothers, that the disease is curable by appropriate treatment, but they were still having doubts about some hidden misbeliefs. The main concern, the patient's family is considering the sickness as a state of social isolation. Even after getting almost cured by the treatment, after a few days they went to do their traditional pujas and mantras instead of giving appropriate medication to the patient. Patient is in a helpless state as he is the youngest and has no voice in front of the elders. In summary, 26-year-old male patient suffering from long-term illness and diagnosed to have acute intestinal obstruction. Symptomatic and supportive treatment was given, and the patient responded well to the medications. For discussion, I have nothing else. Is there any better way to manage this case? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth, for the presentation. Is there anything needs to be clear from the participants? You need to ask her any questions regarding the clarity. You want to know anything else before we go on to the management?
You can raise your hands if you have any questions to be asked. Or
Doctor, can I ask a question?
Yes.
You have mentioned a very patient with 26-year-old young patient presented with features of intestinal obstruction, and he has been
Obstruction.
suffering from long-term illness. What is that long-term illness? Sorry if
Means
I
he was
have.
suffering from fever and this 45 days illness, not a long-term illness. It is just 45 days, 1.5 months. He was having fever, pain abdomen, nausea and vomiting. It was continuing since last 45 days because he was not given adequate treatment. That is it.
Okay, because you have mentioned it as long-term illness, that is the
Yeah,
reason why.
that is
Okay,
my
that's okay.
mistake.
That's no. That's okay. Is
Okay.
there a specific diagnosis? Intestinal obstruction is a clinical situation. There should be a reason for the intestinal obstruction to develop. Something like what could be the reason?
There in his so our ultrasound finding was that very ideal inflammation, long segment thickening, hypoechoic and all. And his blood investigation, the BC was eosinophil 28%. So I was thinking if there is any parasitic infestation
Okay.
adding to or something. I am also not sure. I treated and the patient was almost cured, but I could not come to the real cause. On the basis of the symptoms and the findings, I gave the treatment. I couldn't come to the real diagnosis.
Okay. Because there could be multiple reasons, as you have told. There could be a parasitic infestation. There could be some, because of eosinophilic leukocytosis. There could be some other reason.
There are some suggestions in the chat session
Yes,
also
CT,
asking
CT.
for TB. It can be
Yeah.
TB, and CT could have been one thing to be done. That is one of the suggestion. And she has asked about bowel habits. Was there any constipation? How was the bowel?
No, he was not having any constipation. He after coming out hospital, he had loose stools because it is upper intestinal obstruction, no, small intestinal.
But periileal inflammation shows it is small intestinal, no?
Yes, that's why I said constipation usually occurs with
Okay. I got it. Because he had bile stained aspirate as well. Bile stain, no? It was bile stained, no?
I don't.
No, I think it is somewhere it is shown the. Just go to the previous slides.
Previous slide where she has mentioned about
The
NG
examination,
tube.
NG tube and all.
It was
Greenish one.
dark greenish.
Greenish. That is bile stained. Greenish means it should be bile stained.
Bile stain. It is intestinal obstruction. The discharge is always greenish, thick greenish discharge.
Okay.
No? I have seen like that.
Yeah, see, it will be like that only. So it is not a high level. It is a mid level obstruction. I feel.
Yeah, could be.
High level usually we tell it is above duodenum. Duodenum. I mean, after second part of duodenum, when the bile duct CBD, common bile duct opens, it is usually considered as a mid level obstruction.
This was at distal, jejunal and ileal.
Jejunal and ileal. So it should be a mid level obstruction. So there should be a reason for that. I mean, I'm wondering about. I mean, on the long term management, I'm just wondering about that one. Okay. Is it a practice that in your institution that steroids are usually given to reduce inflammation also?
When other drugs are not responding, I used to give 2-3 doses steroids.
suppose if he is in the immunocompromised status, then how this steroid would affect?
Immunocompromised status means?
It could be anything. Like even TB is also immunocompromised status. And why should
his ESR was 10 millimeters per
okay.
hour, no? So I was not doubting. And he was, yes,
yes, that is a good point. That is a good point.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit inconclusive about the diagnosis itself.
Yeah, that
whether
is
it's
what I
just
mean.
a gastritis or, but with
Gastritis
whatever,
will not produce intestinal obstruction.
obstruction.
No, after treatment, the ultrasound was done, and they said only evidence of gastritis is present after the treatment.
But I'm not
So
sure
for-
how much an ultrasound can tell about gastritis.
Yeah.
So what did he take for the gastritis? So for gastritis to develop, he might have taken something. So what might
No,
have?
that is just after the treatment, no? Or discharging. I discharged him with just symptomatic medications, antacid syrup, pantoprazole, like that.
No. I was wondering if
He was not
the
on treatment for gastritis before.
Yeah, that is
Initially,
what. Initially, he never had gastritis.
No. He was having fever, pain abdomen, vomiting, nausea, and this continuous fever.
Maybe history of recurrent use of past 45 days of fever. Some painkiller he might have previously taken could give reason to gastritis, ma'am.
There is a possibility, but why should that gastritis produce features of intestinal obstruction? What might have caused the inflammatory state of intestinal loops? That is my question. I mean, otherwise, pantoprazole to treat gastritis.
And after the nasogastric drainage, he was quite comfortable and was responding to the medications. He started walking, eating, the fever subsided, everything came to the normal almost. He went home walking. Coming, he was.
So there is one suggestion about paralytic ileus metabolic cause. Someone was suggesting that it can be a paralytic ileus. And there is something called eosinophilic gastroenteritis, where the mainstay of treatment is steroids. So we really don't know what has
that is what
causes obstruction.
That is what I am thinking of. Something like eosinophilic gastroenteritis. If that is a cause, then okay, definitely steroid is the as one of the participants has mentioned. That is one of the modality should be. I mean, I haven't come across with such a situation. That is what. It would have been much better if he could have had a diagnosis. Instead of that long-term illness, if we could have had a diagnosis like, yes, he was diagnosed with this condition, which had resulted in the features of intestinal obstruction, then we could relate each medicine with, you have given antibiotic for controlling infection, you have given steroid for controlling infection secondary to allergic reaction, something like that we should relate. And there is another comment, stool examination culture, like it is not done.
Yeah.
So whenever
here it is more about going for what exactly is the cause for all this, rather than moving on to the management side. We really don't know what exactly can be.
That is it. That is it. Management is perfectly fine because management might have worked well. That is the reason why he left the hospital in a reasonably healthy condition. And you mentioned that, you clearly mentioned that he was relieved and he was able to walk and eat food. That shows that its symptoms are well settled. But what is the diagnosis which has got a long-term implication on her further management? Suppose if it is something which has to be identified and intervened, and family and he has to be counseled. So that is the reason why I am asking.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the discussion point here would be something like Madam has already mentioned in the management of nausea and vomiting to understand why this is happening. So keep on asking why till you get an answer would be one suggestion to manage this kind of situation. Why he has that features in the ultrasound, why he has X-ray erect abdomen, there is multiple air fluid levels. So why there is an obstruction. So ruling out one by one would be one suggestion. That's what I understand from everyone's input, because people are asking for more investigations to see what exactly. And he's a very young.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have to find out. We cannot just give. Yeah, but he might be all right now. That is very good. And whatever medication you have covered, almost all the medications part also. But we still don't know what exactly might have caused this intestinal obstruction. If something needs to be done, it needs to be done. So that would be one learning point.
Yeah, that is what. And she has clearly mentioned that he had lost weight as well. He is emaciated. Patient was emaciated. Something like that you mentioned?
Yes.
That's what. Whether is there? I don't know.
Is there anything else that anyone would want to add? So one thing now we mentioned about clear understanding about what exactly the reason can be. There is one thing by history, the situation, TB. I just lost that. By the history and fact that he improved maybe J infection or TB other than any organic cause.
Yeah, could be.
Dr. Maheshwari, you had something to add on, doctor? Dr. Maheshwari?
No, I think can't hear anything from her.
Yeah, it's okay, ma'am. Ma'am, I want to just mention about the eosinophilic gastroenteritis. Already I typed it in the group. Hello?
Yeah, we heard you. Yeah, we heard you. So she's mentioning again about that eosinophilic gastroenteritis, which she has mentioned in the chat group. That may be one reason why he might have recovered with all this.
Because of
Yeah.
so I want to think.
Ma'am mentioned that obstruction, the better relief will be Dexa 8 to 12 milligram. Betnisol we given here can be, or Dexa is better than the Betnisol. What you suggest, ma'am?
Ma'am, did you hear her question? Why Dexa? Why not prednisolone?
Prednisolone.
For obstruction. Yeah, why? So they have prednisolone. What would you recommend, whether it is dexamethasone or prednisolone? In terms of steroids?
We always prefer dexamethasone because of its long duration of action and less of sodium and water retention properties. Okay. That is the reason why we prefer dexamethasone, and it can be given by both intravenously as well as subcutaneously. So when you give dexamethasone subcutaneously, only thing is that at a single site we cannot give more than 2 ml. We cannot give more than 2 ml, maximum 3 ml. So any subcutaneous bolus injection, if it exceeds 3 ml, it will be painful. So 2 ml of dexamethasone, that means 8 milligram dexamethasone can be comfortably given subcutaneously as well. And its action is prolonged. It lasts for 24 hours.
Thank you.
Maybe one last question before we wind up. We have already reached 4:30. Is there any last question, or can we just wind up the session? So there is one comment
Yes,
in the chat
yes.
session. Ciprofloxacin and
Ciprofloxacin and
ceftriaxone
ceftriaxone. Yes, exactly. I also
given
wanted to
together
comment that.
doesn't
Yes.
provide any additional benefit. Covers the same spectrum, so either of it should be used. So you don't need to combine ciprofloxacin.
Absolutely right.
So that is one suggestion from Dr. Preetham. So can we conclude today's session?
Yes, ma'am. No hands are coming up.
Yeah. So today's presentation was you managed it really well, and good that he got a good symptomatic relief. But one key is to look more into why this happened and the curiosity of why this has happened, and go back to the causes and see what is correctable. I think you have made correcting the correctable, but we don't know exactly what is happening with the diagnosis part. So that is one thing from today's case presentation. But so unless we know exactly the reason why he is having that obstruction, we cannot comment on the management. And I hope nausea, vomiting, you will get the slides and you will go through one by one all the receptors and how the whole mechanism of nausea, vomiting interplays, so that you can choose the right medication. That is really important in palliative care patients, because you deal with a lot of nausea, vomiting scenarios in palliative care. Thank you everyone for joining in. I know that some of you are involved in the COVID treating hospitals, and thank you for taking time and join us back after a few weeks. And thank you, Dr. Rajashree. We know that you were struggling a lot with the internet, and we kept telling we can't hear you. Hope we'll be able to fix it as soon as possible. We need to find some way out for this, because we want to hear from you more during the session. So we don't want to lose you in terms of internet. Thank you so much for taking the time out, and thank you, Raju and Vishnu. Raju, you want to talk about the feedback? I don't know whether you have already sent it.
No, I haven't sent the feedback. So from this session onwards, there is another feature called polls. So I'll be launching the polls now. Everybody will be seeing it, and you can right away do the feedback. There need not be, you don't need to go to any link to do the feedback now. So before winding up, of a couple of things I want to say is that you have heard about many news regarding Zoom platform. So I really want to say that this is completely safe usage of Zoom through for training purpose. It's been ensured by Echo India Group. And one more thing is that today you have logged in without a password. For next session onwards, there will be a password. You can use the same link to log in, but they will be asking for a password, which we will be sending it through emails. So from next session, that is from next Friday onwards, make sure that you log in with the same link as well as by giving a password. It is just to make this Zoom platform more secure. So I'm launching the polls. Can everyone see it on your screen? Please do it and then only leave the meeting.
Should I also do, Raju?
Yeah, sure, ma'am, you can do it.
Okay, bye. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Raju, just check whether everyone is able to see and able to click on whatever you are showing.
Ma'am, we can see it from our end. Around 4 people have already attended. Thank you all. We can see you next Friday with continuation of gastrointestinal symptoms. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.